Welcome to the Burrow. It's your host, Lala Bunny, head trader at Bimbo Trading Academy. And the topic of today's video is the FIRE movement. Let's get into it. So, what is the FIRE movement? The definition from Investopedia is financial independence, retire early. FIRE is a movement of people devoted to a program of extreme savings and investment with the goal of retiring far earlier than traditional budgets and retirement plans would permit. And I've noticed that this could be called, some people say financial independence, retire early, and some say financially independent, retire early. So that's just a slight variation. And the acronym is FIRE. That's the first letter of each term. So here's the background and history. The source for this is I found it on a blog, J.D. Roth Get Rich Slowly. And the author said that the earliest reference to the idea of financial independence comes from an 1872 book called Money and How to Make It by H.L. Reid. And then in the 50s, Life magazine published a few articles that mentioned retiring early, and they profiled different people and how they achieved retiring early. Now, the modern FIRE movement, there was actually the Motley Fool website, which I've been following for years. There was a forum, and there was a member on there who actually was the first to shorten the term financially independent, retired early to FIRE, and they did FI/RE. So, what's up with FIRE? Well, the ethos, the general idea is to consume less while living better. And the goal is also to free up your time. And there are many variations of FIRE. And I want to mention also that FIRE is somewhat subjective and personal to you. So, I've divided these variations into quintiles, which is 5 different groups. There's fat FIRE, chubby FIRE, traditional FIRE, lean FIRE, and poverty FIRE. So at the top, we've got fat FIRE. Fat FIRE stands for Financial Independence Retire Early with a focus on accumulating a significantly larger amount of wealth than the standard FIRE approach, allowing for a more luxurious lifestyle in retirement, often involving higher spending and a greater level of financial freedom compared to a traditional early retirement plan, essentially. It means that retiring early with a fat Essentially, it means retiring early with a fat nest egg to support a lavish lifestyle. So the cutoff is around if you're making over 100,000 a year. That's not in salary. That's in retirement. So that means that your assets are producing. Usually, it's investments, and the concept is that you create this nest egg, and then you can draw down on it. And there's a rule, like a percent, 3 to 4% is the guideline. So you spend your time when you're working, you reduce your living expenses so that you can keep adding to your nest egg. So instead of spending all your money, you're saving, you're tucking it away like a little squirrel with all those little nuts. And you're adding till you hit this magic number called your FIRE number. And then when you turn let's say you retire at age 55 and you think you're going to live to about 85. You need 30 years. That's 30 years that you're going to have to take. Remember those nuts in that tree that you hid? Now you're taking, let's say, a few nuts every year. You got to make sure those last for the whole amount because you don't want to run out of money when you're old, you can't work, you have medical bills on it. Like there could be inflation, there could be, we could go through all sorts of things in the economy. So it's an idea of planning for the future to make sure you're taken care of in the future. There's other ways to do it besides investing in the stock market. You could invest in rental properties. To some extent, you will be managing those rental properties, but you can also hire someone to do that. And you have to factor that all into your plan. And you also have to factor in if you're going to adjust your living costs and expenses and change the way that you're living. So one thing, people do notice that they spend less in retirement because they no longer have to drive to work every day, so they don't have those transportation costs. They might not have to spend as much on like professional clothing or even going out to eat, like because a lot of times we do things like go out for drinks with our coworkers and we spend money. When I was a teacher, I spend money, my own money on classroom supplies. So when you stop working, you notice that your expenses also do lower a bit. But like I mentioned, there is the fear that there are also expenses that might increase during retirement. So you need to plan this all out. Now, the cutoff, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, so I'll just say it. Oh yeah, $100,000 per year or more. So if you can fat fire, you're definitely in a high income bracket. Now, chubby fire, that cutoff would be around like 80,000 a year or more. That means you figured out how to live on 80,000 a year, and or I guess between 80 and 100, because then you'll be in fat fire, and you figured out how to live off of that much money until until you die, basically. So planning for retirement, you do have to think about death. You have to think about funerals. You have to think about where you want, like, estate planning, what you want, if you own properties or houses or bank accounts, investment accounts. You need to make arrangements for all these things. Now, regular fire, I'd say the cutoff is about 60,000. Now, when it was started, the cutoff might have been closer to 40,000, but due to the inflationary economy that we're living in, seems like 60,000 is a reasonable, what I would call a middle class lifestyle, but different people have different views on this. So regular fire is around 60,000 a year. Now, fire by definition includes frugality, extreme savings, and aggressive investments. So you could argue that chubby fire and fat fire are not even really fire because there's no frugality in that. Unless the people are living very frugally during the years that they're saving so that they can live a more luxurious lifestyle in retirement. So some people, like I'll give an example. Let's say they're making 80,000 a year and they choose to live off of just 20,000 a year. So they're living super frugally and they're tucking all that other money away in investments. But then when they retire, they actually can live on more than that 20,000 that they were living off of while they were working. So there's different ways to do it. It's like you have to calculate it for yourself and what's best for you and your family. And speaking of family, kids and partners and spouses, this will all affect your calculations. So, regular fire. Well, fire proponents may start by calculating their fire number, generally 25 times their annual expenses. Well, that's because they're calculating for about 25 years of living, which is the amount of money they expect to need in order to retire comfortably. Typically, fire followers withdraw 3 to 4% of their savings annually to cover living expenses in retirement. And now there's lean fire. So lean fire would be anything probably under 40,000. So if you can imagine, how can you live off of $40,000 a year or less, you would probably fall in the lean fire category. Again, the size of your family is going to affect this. For an individual, that might be easy, but for a whole big family, that might be more difficult. Now, poverty fire, the cutoff is around $20,000 a year. Technically, the poverty cutoff is closer to like 15,000. But again, with the way things are, how expensive everything are, say if you can live off of 20,000 a year or less, it means you've severely reduced your living expenses. Now, how is poverty fire different from just being in poverty? So the difference is that when you are an individual who is in poverty, you're struggling, you're trying to work, and your income comes from your labor. But if you are in poverty fire, you have that nest egg. You have that security, and that's what you're drawing down on. So some people would call you wealthy even if you're living at a poverty level. So because if you have, let's say, 200K in the bank and you're living off of those investments, you're living at let's say monk mode. You're living at like a monk level. You might live very simply. Like we're talking about people who maybe they just rent out a room somewhere. Maybe they eat ramen every night. They're just trying to really cut their costs. They never buy new clothes. They're living very modestly, but they've got that money in the bank, that security net, that emergency fund. And people who are in true poverty don't have that. So it's sort of like when people do like become monks, like some people choose that as a lifestyle, but it's a choice. And that's very important to note the differentiation. So when we call it poverty fire, These people are choosing to live below their means. Now, there's something called, I guess, these are some bonuses. So spouse fire means like one person can retire, but the other keeps working. And a lot of times this is due to health insurance. So it might be like, oh, my partner has health insurance, and they can just work part time. So they're going to continue, but I've already retired. Um, then there's barista fire. So barista fire is when you retire from your main career, um, but you continue to work a more relaxed pace at a low pressure job. Now, I'm not saying that being a barista is low pressure, but it's an example of part-time work that people could maintain, because let's say they're retiring from a career of like marketing, corporate law, computer programming. They're making a conscious decision to leave that world and pursue something else. And it does not have to be being a barista. It could be like being a park ranger. It could be like well, actually, there are cutoffs for that. I looked into that. Sometimes you have to start that before a certain age. But there's certain, like for me, I left full-time teaching and I started doing things like deliveries and dog walking. So that would count as barista fire because I'm doing a different type of work at that point. Okay, there's coast fire. So coast fire is when you've saved and invested enough, where it becomes optional if you want to save and invest anymore. So you know, so that nest egg, you built it up so aggressively that you're like, I can coast now. I know that it will be there for me. I've already checked out all the numbers, plugged in the numbers, and I can coast now. I can continue working, but I know that when I hit that age that I want to retire at, that the money will be there. And there's something called slow-fi. Uh, and this is new to me. I learned this today. So it's the scenic route. It's a philosophy where you start to design a life you truly love by making changes and tweaking the system. The focus is on intentionality and freedom. So slow-fi is like, um, you're like slow, your mind, it's a mindset shift. Okay, so how are you going to achieve fire? So some people live abroad because the cost of living might be less in another country, assuming they're coming from a economy where they're earning more, and then where the like I'm just going to talk about US because it's easier. I know the US. So like if they move from a country where the US dollar can stretch more based on like how much the food costs, how much the shelter costs. So some people achieve fire by moving away from the economy where they initially earned all the money. Some just move to a lower cost of living area within their nation. So, like, for example, in the US, you might move from like an expensive city into a rural area. Other people, they'll like buy a duplex and rent half of it out. So they live on one side and rent out the other. And other people even adopt something like van life and do something very extreme where they reduce their living expenses so much. So if you want to know more about fire, there's plenty on the internet. Some blogs that I like, there's Mr. Money Mustache and there's a Financial Samurai blog. And I've been actually reading these for years and they're great. So I knew about fire, but I didn't realize only because I was actually on Reddit I discovered lean fire and poverty fire, and I was so relieved to discover those because fire seems so out of reach for me. And I realized that I can make adjustments and try to achieve a lean fire or a poverty fire retirement. So I'm going to sum up before we go just the cutoffs. So, like, poverty fire would be like after you retire, living off of like $20,000 a year. I'm talking US dollars this whole video. So assume I'm talking about US dollars. So lean fire would be 40K, traditional fire would be around 60K, chubby fire 80K, and fat fire is 100K and above. So that is an update on financial independence, retire early, and the way that different people in the online community have attacked it. And I'm sure you can find more on YouTube. And happy trading. Bye.